Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I want to ask you about Pastor Brunson in a moment, but first, the disappearance of this columnist from the Washington Post. What's the appetite on Capitol Hill to confront the Saudis over what might have happened here?
Well, if it's true, and it appears that it is, that he was murdered in their consulate by an assassination team, there needs to be some significant consequences to that. I think that's maybe eventually targeted sanctions on individuals. That's, any other host of things available to this administration, of which they know way more than any member of Congress or Senate in terms of those tools. What we have to be careful about, though, John, is there are some people that are saying, we're going to cut off all relations with Saudi Arabia. And these are some people, even on my side of the aisle, that have been pining for a day when we can cut off relations with Saudi Arabia for whatever reason. There has to be something in the middle between do nothing and cut off all relations. Let's keep in mind, in Saudi Arabia, in Syria, there's 500,000 dead Syrians, 50,000 of which are children, and Iran has responsibility with that. Obviously, Syria does, and so does Russia. So there needs to be consequences, but let's not jump off the deep end and say, let's never talk to the Saudis again. Yeah,
it's difficult. These things are always thorny questions. You've got the Saudis as the counterweight to Iran in the Middle East. Obviously, they're a big oil supplier to the world as well as to us. But then you've got elements like the fact that the 9/11 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia, most of them. There's always been a complicated relationship with Saudi Arabia in this country.
Yeah, and imagine what happens if we push Saudi Arabia away, have no relationship. And again, they should be held accountable to this, don't get me wrong. But if we push them away and isolate them, the Russians, who have no moral compunction about any of this stuff, will be happy to fill that vacuum, to sell them all the weapons they want. And then in a couple of years, we're going to sit here and go, gee, how did the Russians get such a big role in the Middle East? And what did President Trump or what did anybody do to get that to happen? So this is why with international politics, we have to hold strong to our principles, but we have to be nuanced, because otherwise we would have a relationship with almost nobody around the world if every time there was something terrible that happened, and this is very terrible, we just quit talking to them or cut off all sales or any relationship.
Yeah, some have called for canceling $110 billion worth of arms purchases that the Saudis want to make. You don't sound like you're in that camp.
I think that is really, really premature. And if you look at some of the senators that are calling for this, they have been calling for this before this ever even happened. This has been an agenda. Even some on my side of the aisle who are more isolationist that want to extract ourselves from everywhere around the world. So let's be very careful before we jump to that. And ultimately, and I did this even for President Obama, I give the president a lot of leverage on foreign policy because he knows better. He has a lot more intel than, frankly, even members of Congress or Senate.
All right. What's your intel on Pastor Brunson? Does it appear that he might be released today?
Well, that's the indications we're hearing, and that certainly would be fantastic news. As you know, for the last few years, our relationship with a NATO ally, Turkey's a NATO ally, has been really declining. I think if they release the pastor today, that would really do a lot for a détente with this kind of aggression we have with them. I think you'll probably see the sanctions that the president rightly put on them lifted, and we can get a much closer relationship. But I think there's a message in this, which is reacting even to allies with strength, as the president is doing, can get some of the positive things we need. And that's a lesson that I think was forgotten for the last 8 years prior to this administration.
I can't help but wonder if these two stories aren't somehow related, and I wonder if you know. I mean, the Saudis, the disappearance of the columnist, a lot of the information on this is coming from the Turks, and then all of a sudden we get this discussion of the possible release of Andrew Brunson. Do you think there is a connection? Are the Turks trying to somehow get back in the good graces of the United States? The relationship's been on a downward spiral for years.
Yeah, it's quite possible. Their economy is hurting. Erdogan, who has trended towards Muslim Brotherhood ideology, is paying a price for that right now, probably in his polls, but also in his economy. And being on the side of the United States of America versus Russia or versus Iran or anybody else is a winning proposition. You're our buddy, we'll be your buddy, and you're going to get paid big dividends for that. That's an important lesson to remember, whether you're Turkey, whether you're any country out there in the world that would seek to be our friend or enemy.
Adam Kinzinger is a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and a Republican congressman from Illinois. Congressman, thanks.
Meanwhile, as we continue to follow